Hello, boys and girls. In my opinion, the worse you are, the more the gun matters. Let's get into it. Here's a question posted. I thought this was interesting, actually. So I'm going to read it out. Ben, what are the numbers on your performance improvements from the Staccato versus the Glock? I would argue that it takes a shooter at your level to realize the performance gains. Now, I did put up a reply to this. If anybody caught it, I would argue the opposite. So that's what I'm going to do now. I'm going to argue the opposite of this. So if you have a Staccato like this, you have it like, oh, those are for really good shooters. I kind of feel the opposite of that. So first, to address the question directly about numbers, it's way too early for me to give numbers on like, oh, what's the performance gain? As a matter of fact, at this point, I would say like there's not really a performance improvement over the Glock. There's a change in a bunch of characteristics, like the way that the performance happens or how I feel about the performance. But when you just break it down to numbers, there's not a dramatic shift. There's to an untrained eye, there's hardly any shift at all, I would say. But in due course, I would say maybe the next week or so, I'll come back with some numbers and talk more about that. However, yeah, it's too early for that. I'll come back to it. All right, but let me give you some specific numbers. That'll kind of highlight what I'm talking about here. Sub-second reloads are a thing that a lot of competitive shooters work for. So like shot, reload to shot, doing that in under a second it's real quick. I would say basically this never happens in a match, like basically never. But on a training range, you know, guys they get warmed up and they can clack off some real fast reloads. Now, the sub-second reload is something that, like anybody, I chased for a long time. If you have a factory-ish type pistol like this Glock, you don't have that big of an opening here. If you've got a mag weld out Staccato, you have a lot more margin for error. When I started training, I was shooting a Beretta, no mag weld. I was shooting production division where that stuff's not allowed. I think from the time I started serious training to the time I clacked off a sub-second reload, and it was probably 2 years. I don't remember exactly, but it was a long time to do that. A long time. Then it's like to take that same skill and translate that to another platform. I think after the Beretta, I very seriously shot a Tanfoglio, which is same, but different, like very similar in a lot of characteristics. Metal frame, double single type of gun, but it was different enough. I mean, different magazine size, different mag weld, blah, blah, blah. Like it took, when I swapped platforms, and at this time, I should point out, like right now, I'm a hoe. Like I'll shoot whatever gun. I have tons of different guns, tons of different setups. I don't really care too much. I'm not emotionally invested in which gun I'm shooting, which is hysterical for me because y'all are really emotional invested in like what I'm doing, or a lot of you guys are. But I don't give a shit. But at that time, it was like, no, I shoot a Beretta. That's what I shoot. That's it. Because I'm trying to win a bunch of matches. So it's like I stuck on that gun for like 7 years. I didn't touch anything else really. All right. When I swapped to a Tanfoglio, like I was already national champion at this point. Like I was, I was pretty good. Like I could do a lot of stuff. It still took months to nail a sub-second reload. It just did. Even though it's like, it was the same kind of thing, but it was like, it took months for that to happen. After that, I met Matt, I started doing more like sort of like tactical type of, I just do shooting training, but you guys would call it tactical because you're nerds. So I started shooting a Glock, and this gun, in my opinion, the plastic frame, the way it's set up, it's conducive to fast reloads, in my opinion. And it took weeks to do a sub-second reload. Okay, that's the way it is. With the with a mag weld out gat like this, day one. Day fucking one. Sub-second reload. Now, a lot of that is changes in my skill level, obviously. Because I've trained this whole time, blah, 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 all that stuff. However, you take a big mag wall, put it on here, it's going to change the situation. It's going to change the scenario. All right. So take that kind of thinking and apply it to really every dimension of the firearm. Okay. So for example, here, red dot sight, very light single action trigger. Okay. So maybe it took, like when I started training, it took a while with like a factory Beretta to shoot a small group, iron sights, heavier trigger. Okay. Took a while, but with this gun, it's just easier. It's just easier to do that. Don't think in terms of like, oh, what's the difference in the group size? Like, don't worry about that. Just like, how hard was it to shoot a really small group? Well, it wasn't that hard because the trigger's really light. All right. So in my head, it's not that better, more like a racier gun, lighter trigger, big mag, big grip, heavier gun, whatever. Like there's certain characteristics that make the gun easier to shoot under certain circumstances. It makes it easier to do certain things. All right. That's really what like the racier guns have. But in a sense, not in a sense, you can do these things with other guns. Like, for example, my fastest reload that I can ever remember doing, it was with a Glock. It was not with the Staccato. All right. The fastest El Presidente I can ever remember doing, it was with the Tanfoglio. It wasn't with the Staccato. All right. However, the numbers that I can I'm laying down with the Staccato, like very, very early on in shooting it, they're not the best numbers I've ever put up, but they're really, really good numbers. And they were not difficult to achieve. Day fucking one, like 80 reload, I think I put down with a Staccato. No dry fire, no, just like I didn't do, like, wasn't like every reload was 0.8 seconds, but one of them was. And that, 20 years ago, I would have like flipped shit if I'd done that, even once. So anyway, what I would say is that the performance gains from the guns, it doesn't really work that way. Like anything I can do with one gun, I can do with another gun. It's more of a matter of consistency and repeatability. Like that's an easier way to look at it. Like, can I shoot a super tight, super good group with a Glock? Yes, I can. The Gen 5 Glocks are very accurate. They really are. They're really good in that way. However, in terms of like consistency and repeatability, like with a factory trigger on a Gen 5 Glock, let's say iron sights or whatever, it's like I'm not going to be as consistent as like punching him into a small hole as I am with a gun with a red dot and like a telekinetic trigger. All right. So the way that I look at this is like having a better gun is going to advantage worse shooters. Like the less experienced you are, the more of an advantage you're going to have with a better gun. Whereas, if you trained a lot and all that stuff, you're kind of like, oh, well, I can do the things with pretty much any gun. It's just a matter of how difficult it's going to be to do the thing. Like whatever, how fast I want to draw, like how fast I'm shooting, whatever, any metric that you want to look at, it just becomes easier with an easier gun. Now, if you're, less experienced, you're new at shooting, whatever, having a gun with, compensator to mitigate the recoil, super light trigger, big fat mag well, relatively big grip, easy to deal with. Like the worse you are at shooting, the more of an advantage you're going to perceive that to be. Honestly. Like that's actually kind of the interesting thing about it. It's like the performance gains comes to people who have less skill, not people that, are more skilled. It just becomes easier to achieve the same thing. Now, at the very, very top end of performance, like let's say you're like nationally competitive, you're trying to win really big matches, all those advantages that you have with one type of gun or another, like they kind of add up in the aggregate, and you're going to be able to shoot over the course of 18 or 20 stages or whatever. You're going to be able to shoot a better score with a better gun in the aggregate, but like moment to moment, stage to stage, there's not really a huge difference in performance between, like a carry optics type of Glock and a gun like this. There's not a huge difference to a person like me. It's just like the sensation of shooting them is different, but if you look at the numbers, it's really not that different for me. However, like I said, if you're brand new, like there's a big difference between like a 5-pound trigger with lots of travel and like a 2.5-pound trigger that hardly moves. It's going to advantage the lesser shooter, the less skilled person quite a lot more.